And so how the things are going there?
Well, they're going. I don't know. We're kind of hoping that this new wave in Europe doesn't become a wave here in the United States. Just
Mm-hmm.
keeping our fingers crossed. I don't know.
What are the feelings about the Ukraine invasion in your side?
Well, I think in the very beginning there was a little bit of a hesitancy from the right, mainly, which is a weird thing in here, um, because of course Donald Trump was a friend of Vladimir Putin, and they don't like to go against him in any form or shape. But I think the country's pretty united right now in terms of what's really going on. I mean, a sovereign country being invaded by a military force is not an acceptable thing in the 21st century, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's the same as here. And actually, while the thing was limited to the Donbas region, maybe there was some reasoning or questioning,
Yeah.
but after the all-out invasion, yeah, it's a pity. I love Russia actually, but it's not acceptable what Putin is doing. I think, yeah, we are all hating Putin, but
Yeah, and I'm quite sure that a quiet majority of Russians are hating Putin too, but they're not even allowed to hate. That's the problem.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
Uh, and that's the sad part of it. I think they're going to have a whole lost generation after this, unless Putin disappears very quickly. I don't see any other outcome for that. They're going to be a
Yeah,
pariah to the world, and I don't know.
yeah,
It's a very sad situation. I feel the same way regarding Russia. I think it's a waste. It's always been a waste, actually. A lot of mistakes made by the West when the Soviet Union fell apart. I mean, they should have incorporated Russia faster and into the West, and none of it would have happened right now. So it's a waste of talent. It's a waste of culture. It's a waste of a lot of things, and now they're in the hand of that dictator. It's it's sad. No,
yeah.
and then there are all those people being displaced and the humanitarian crisis that I don't know how you guys are going to handle it there in Europe because you already have enough.
Yeah, we need to thoroughly decide to be welcoming and arrange things to welcome people from all around, from Africa, from war regions. And there's a price to pay. I think if we manage to, yeah, to arrange things in a more just way, we could we could free resources for a lot more people.
Yeah. Well, maybe Europe is going to be a little bit more like the United States in the end. It's like a bunch of immigrant countries. So,
Yeah.
uh, well, I'm going to keep myself.
Hi, Alberto. Hi, Angelo. Nice to have you with us. Hi. Well, I'm a little bit late. Sorry for that because we had one program, cultural program with Down syndrome children in our nearby auditorium, and we're just coming from that point. Well, so to all, very good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all. This is our this is our pleasures that we have these two eminent personality, Alberto Costa and Angelo Curfi, among us as a speaker on the eve of World Down Syndrome Day Observation 2022 by Trisomy 21 Research Society Indian Chapter. Our collaborator is Down Syndrome Association Kolkata and University of Calcutta. So without any further delay, I want to directly enter into the technical sections. Our first speaker is Alberto Costa. Professor Alberto Costa is a very eminent scientist in the field of Down syndrome research and a very dignified personality and members of the Trisomy 21 Research Society. I will request our Indian chapter member, Professor Papia Ghosh, to introduce Professor Alberto Costa to the audience. May I request Professor Papia Ghosh to introduce Professor Alberto Costa.
Good morning, respected speakers, and a very good evening to all the participants. I feel really privileged to introduce such a great person, Professor Alberto Costa. Professor Alberto Costa is the professor of Department of Psychiatry, Case Western Reserve University, School of Medicine, Cleveland, Ohio, USA. For the last 25 years, he has been focusing specifically on Down syndrome research and secondarily on neurodevelopmental and neurodegenerative disorder in general. He has conceived and implemented the first clinical study in the field of Down syndrome based directly on experimental results in animal models. Professor Costa's research team has recently concluded a larger confirmatory phase 2 study of the effects of the drug Memantine on the cognitive abilities of individuals with Down syndrome, in which we recruited over 180 study participants. Presently, he is the chair of the Trisomy 21 Research Society Committee for Clinical Research and member of COVID-19 Down Syndrome Task Force for the T21RS. Sir has received many honor and awards. He is also the member, editorial board, Brain Sciences, Clinical Neuroscience section, and received the International Cicely Jerome Legevin Award in 2016, Foundation Jérôme Lejeune Award Paris, France, 2015, Award for Significant Achievement in Down Syndrome Research, the City Council of Cleveland, Ohio, 2015. Today, the topic that he is going to talk is Translational Research in Down Syndrome, the case study of the recently concluded phase 2 clinical trial of the cognitive effects of the drug Memantine in adolescent and young adults with Down syndrome. Sir, it's up to you now.
Okay, let me see if I can get my presentation up. Okay. Okay.
Just a minute, sir. We are just shutting our screen share.
Okay.
Oh. Sir, it's up to you now. You can share your screen, sir.
Okay. Let's see a window. Here it is. Can you see it now? Let me see if I can
Sir, it's up.
Okay, this video. Okay, got it here. All right. I hope you can see it well. First of all, thank you very much. Thank you, Sujay, for the invitation, and thank you for the organizing committee that put this meeting together. It's a real honor to be here today, and even though it's a virtual meeting, it's a pleasure to finally make it to India. Over the years, because of my physical appearance, I have been confused with in India by many members of the India diaspora, and I have made many good friends that way. So it's a real pleasure being here today. We're going to talk about this translational research in Down syndrome, and we're going to talk a little bit about how we got into the point that we end up doing this phase 2 trial. We're going to describe a little bit of the results of it, and we're going to talk about some of the we're going to talk a little bit about some of the future steps on this research. So happy T21 Day. T21 is the cause of Down syndrome, and there are two good reasons to study Down syndrome from the standpoint of brain function. The first one being the fact that just in the United States, you have anywhere between, depending on whose numbers you read, anywhere between 210 to 40,000 people with Down syndrome. This number is supposed to translate into somewhere between 5 and 6 million people with Down syndrome worldwide. Just in India alone, it's estimated that about 20,000 births happen every year. And that all makes Down syndrome the most common genetically defined cause of intellectual disability. And Down syndrome is still an unmet medical need as far as a developmental disorder is concerned. That number that I mentioned to you translates into roughly one person with Down syndrome being born every 5 minutes in the world. And And nowadays in the United States and most of the developed world, we have a life expectancy of individuals with Down syndrome to be roughly about 60 years of age. And persons with Down syndrome develop the earliest documented form of Alzheimer's disease pathology that is known. And therefore, Down syndrome is still an unmet medical need as far as a neurodegenerative disorder is concerned. Again, if you look at the intellectual disability sides, if you just look at straight up from the standpoint of IQ, basically, and you compare Down syndrome with different disorders that produce intellectual disability. For example, lead exposure, which the big deal here in the United States. People really go to war because of the idea that lead exposure causes about 6 points of loss of IQ. In Down syndrome,
excuse me, Alberto.
Oh, yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Your voice is
Oh,
breaking.
you were switching slides. Maybe we were behind. Okay.
Oh, okay. So, okay, where are we?
Thank you.
So is it going slowly or it's not switching at all?
Now we see the second slide.
Okay.
With many chromosomes, colored chromosomes.
Yeah, so basically, and that's what I was just saying. It's all
Okay,
written
cool.
in there now. Can you see the beyond just the chromosomes now? Can you see some writing on the right?
Yes.
And it ends with Down syndrome is still an unmet medical need.
Yep.
Okay. So do you get the next slide now? Or it hasn't?
We see in the left panel that there's a bar plot with many colors, but it is not showing in the main plot, in the main slide.
Yeah, that's bad. So I don't know how to. So I don't know what to do about that. Let me. I can get out and get back in and try to. Thanks for letting me know. I was just. Okay, I'm going to share the entire screen and see if. I lost my ability to share now.
Then you
Let
can
me
share it.
see. Okay. Let's see if I share the entire screen. Can you see things better?
That's perfect. Yeah.
Okay. So it's the entire screen as opposed to the window. So you know when you do it. Anyway, so we were basically saying that compared to other disorders, Down syndrome causes an average loss of 55 points in IQ versus, for example, lead intoxication that decreases your IQ by about 6 points, and things like schizophrenia, which is devastating psychiatric disorder that causes about a 15-point loss of IQ, and fetal alcoholic syndrome is a similar deficit, and and Turner syndrome, which is another chromosomal disorder, also cause about 15-point loss of IQ, and other genetic disorders such as Fragile X and tuberous sclerosis complex cause a larger but still lower loss of IQ than trisomy 21. You'd have to go to other very devastating chromosome genetic disorders like Rett syndrome to produce levels of loss of IQ that are comparable to what you see in Down syndrome. So in terms of how we get there, how you get basically a 10-year-old person, and this plot here basically shows mental age being plotted against chronological age. And I know that this whole idea of mental age and chronological age are a little bit passé right now, but it gives us some idea of how to interpret some of those things. Basically, what you'd expect is a person to have a linear growth in terms of their mental age versus their chronological age, and should they hit about 16 years of age, and then they kind of stabilize at that point, a 10-year-old with Down syndrome would be about halfway in there. And the question is, how do you get there? And there are many pathways, trajectories of how you can get there. And for many, many years, the idea in Down syndrome was that it was something similar to E, in which basically that person had a delayed development from the get-go, and basically you'd end up there because it was delayed and it stayed delayed throughout. But over the past, I'd say, 30 years, we have learned that in the case of Down syndrome, C is more likely to be the case, in which you basically have a period, it's a short period of 6 months to a year, where development is fairly typical, and then it starts deviating from that typical development, and then that's how you get here to basically half of the developmental age that you'd expect for that 10-year-old child. So in a way, that gives us some hope that if we are able to intervene very early, we might actually be able to have a real impact in terms of that developmental outcome. So just to sum up, the cognitive function of individuals with Down syndrome, their deficits are generally global in nature, and except that they disproportionately affect cognitive processes that depend on the hippocampus and the prefrontal cortex, which include deficits in short-term memory and episodic memory. And there are also disproportionate deficits and let me get this thing going, just so I don't overtalk here. And they also have disproportionate deficit in terms of development of speech and linguistic competence, and their receptive vocabulary typically is better or better developed than their expressive vocabulary. And Down syndrome is also associated with relative robustness of visual and visual spatial processing, which basically has led many educators to basically emphasize visual presentation of educational material versus material that's presented through the auditory path. There are some people who think otherwise and basically say that maybe you should emphasize what they're weak at, but I think that view is kind of decreasing in terms of popularity as we go by. So, as I said, the 1-year-old child with Down syndrome has a life expectancy of 60 years, and basically because of their longer life expectancy, you start seeing the development of dementia. And this is just to show you an MRI of a person with Down syndrome who is about 50 years of age. And that's a person with Down syndrome who is 50 years of age and has dementia. So, of course, this is an extreme case, but basically you can see that there is quite a bit of cortical atrophy in that picture, and the ventricular area is highly increased, and that's basically due to the cortical atrophy. This is an old slide from Zygmunt and Lott, but that kind of shows you how things go in terms of Down syndrome. This would be the general population, the folks with Down syndrome in terms of their development of pathology. And you can see that by age 40, they all have the Alzheimer's type of pathology. And even people as young as 30 years of age or 25 to 30 years of age can actually have some degree of Alzheimer's pathology. And but the development of actual dementia in that population is kind of shifted to the right by about 20 years. So it takes a bit longer. It's by about age 55 that you have half of the individuals with Down syndrome actually showing clinical dementia signs. And that's, again, shifted by about 30 years compared to the general population, because all of us at some point will develop some of the features of Alzheimer's, and half of us by age 85 will have dementia of Alzheimer's. So it's just that it's a whole lot faster. It's 30 years faster than what happens in the general population. This is from work of Andres Streiton group that actually put a real number in there. It's probably the most complete characterization of a population of individuals with Down syndrome. And it puts basically that number of the mean age of dementia diagnosis in folks with Down syndrome at about 55, 56 years of age. And so many people, when you talk to parents and all, you get this question of, why you're talking about IQ and Alzheimer's disease when you're talking about Down syndrome. And the thing is that, unfortunately, we live in an age where people think that they can live in a fantasy world full of fake news, in a world where the knowledge, training, and expertise can be ignored. And but as we're seeing with the news that are happening around the world, for example, with this vaccine hesitancy and the coronavirus pandemic and the invasion of Ukraine, certain realities simply refuse to be ignored. And there is no burying your head in the sand because reality doesn't simply magic disappear. Pretending that the reality of the medical needs of individuals with Down syndrome does not exist, or letting ourselves be deceived by cheap, non-evidence-based promises, such as the use of dietary supplements or alternative therapies, help no one, especially those with Down syndrome. So, and here we get of the why, individual why did I get involved with Down syndrome research? And if you look at there's a young lady here on the left, her name is Costa. And as you may imagine, she's related to me. She's my daughter, and she was born 26 years ago with trisomy 21. And this is her when she was still in high school, spending some time in my lab doing PCR and genotyping mice. But make no mistake, she has Down syndrome. She's 26, and I worry sick every day that 10 years from now, her brain will be full of Alzheimer's type pathology. So it is a real thing to me. So that's why I decided to undertake research in Down syndrome. And that's when she was born in the mid-90s. That was kind of the state of translational research in Down syndrome. It's the typical situation where you go to the doctor and they tell you, unfortunately, there is no cure, in this case, a therapy, and there's not even a race for the cure, right? And the situation only changed about the same year that my daughter was born, 1995, when Muriel Davison published a seminal paper with Roger Reeves showing some deficits in this animal that basically has a genetic disorder that is similar to Down syndrome. It has a partial trisomy of this chromosome 16 in the mouse, which is similar in nature to chromosome 21. So it's the distal part of chromosome 16, and there are other parts of the mouse genome that are similar to chromosome 21, but the largest part is definitely the distal part of chromosome 16 that's similar to the proximal part of chromosome 21. The finding that mouse has helped a lot. And for example, it was the finding of hippocampal dysfunction in this mouse, the so-called TS65Gen mouse, that led to the discovery of hippocampal dysfunction in persons with Down syndrome, which, as I mentioned before, is expressed primarily as disproportionate deficits in episodic and spatial memory. And then my own contribution to the field, I'd say probably my main contribution to the field was the discovery of some relationship of dysfunction of this subtype of glutamate receptors, the so-called NMDA receptors in Down syndrome. We won't have time today to talk about how did it come about, but I'm just going to mention to you that we did this work in 2008, and we showed that in a mouse that's a model for Down syndrome, this TS65Gen mouse, they have a hard time remembering that they've been exposed to this fear in this chamber that's basically caused by giving them a mild shock in their paws. You put them back like 24 hours later, and the control mouse, which doesn't have the trisomy, remembers pretty well, and it stays frozen by over 50% of its time. And the TS65Gen mouse, which is the trisomic mouse, basically barely remembers that it was there, because it barely freezes when it sees that same chamber again where they've been shocked. If you give them a single shot of memantine before they've been shocked and after they get back to that chamber, their performance or the freezing gets back to a level that's very similar to what you see in the typical mouse. And young mice behave exactly like old mice. And of course, mice are not little people, and we also have done over time some work with organoids that we're not going to talk about. But the reality is you can only test those ideas in the real world of clinical trials. So that led us, that first work with the mouse led us to do this early trial. So it was a pilot trial where we actually look at the 16-week exposure to memantine. And basically, we hypothesized, just like in the mouse, that memantine was going to improve the test score of young adult with Down syndrome in hippocampal-dependent measures. So our patient population or participant population was between 18 and 32. So we were trying to avoid the Alzheimer's range, but they were fully developed people in terms of their cognitive skills. And we recruited 40 people with Down syndrome of both genders. And it was a randomized double-blind placebo trial. And basically, we made a comparison between the effects of memantine and placebo on those putatively dependent hippocampal function measures. And of course, because that was the first trial that involved memantine in folks with Down syndrome, and I can't say really the first trial because at the same time, Andres Tridon was doing an Alzheimer's trial in folks with Down syndrome in London. He was using half of the dose that we were using, but it was a memantine trial. So safety was paramount, and we wanted to find out whether memantine was well tolerated. In the end, we didn't find any significance as far as the two primary measures were concerned, which were those one here. But we did find a very weak but significant effect on one of the hippocampal-dependent measures that we're looking at, the so-called California Verbal Learning Test. And we saw a tiny little improvement. And this is basically the raw data for that trial. You can see that in the folks that took the memantine, there was a significant improvement. That was driven primarily by like 3 individuals that had quite a bit of improvement. Only one person had a decrease in function as measured by that test. Whereas in the placebo, things went all over the place, as you'd expect from placebo, but there was this tiny little tendency toward improvement here too. But it was bigger for the memantine arm of the study, and that led us to do some measurement of the effect size of memantine on various measures, and the two ones that really stood out was the primary measure, the California Verbal Learning Test, and this thing called recall of digits, which is a measure of short-term memory. Everything else kind of stayed below this 0.5 effect size range. But anyway, that was the first time that we actually saw something that kind of moved the needle on its own, that didn't require any extra push for an effect to be seen. And that led us to actually design this new clinical trial, which we have just recently concluded and was just published at the Lancet Neurology. And in this case, we basically recruited folks that were 15 to 32 years of age. The FDA here in the United States allowed us to finally include slightly younger people. And they were basically folks with trisomy 21 or complete unbalanced translocation of chromosome 21. And they were in general good health. And they were recruited from the community at a center in Brazil at Albert Einstein Hospital there, and another in the US at University Hospitals here in Cleveland. And in all, we recruited 185 participants with Down syndrome. And of those, 160 were randomly assigned to either memantine or the placebo group. We end up, of those, just about 149 actually completed the entire trial. This time, the California Verbal Learning Test was our primary measure because that's what actually changed in the previous trial. And we basically included a few more measures. I just wanted to show you here that before we even got hold of the results, we were looking at just the baseline results as measured from our old trial in Denver, the new trial in Cleveland, and in Sao Paulo, just to see how those measures compared across sites. And you can see that there is no real significant difference between the primary measure in Cleveland, Sao Paulo, or Denver. And the same thing was true for this other sub-measure of the primary measure. And many other, I can basically tell you that just about everything was the same between the three sites, except for the big thing that was really different between the three sites was socioeconomic status as measured by years of education of parents. It was higher, as you'd expect, in the United States than it was in Brazil, but that didn't change all the other measures. So that tells us something related to Down syndrome in a way that is sort of fundamental, and it's kind of hard to hear from the parent point of view that basically in countries where we offer inclusion and early intervention, and that's the case both in the United States and in Brazil, we kind of got to a plateau of where function really is. And it's been the same since the very early 2000s. Nothing has changed very much. And it does look like we hit this biological plateau. And without actually changing the biology, I don't think we're going to go very far. So, so that's why those three sides look exactly the same, because, I mean, even with very loose criteria for inclusion, that was basically that the person needs to be a little bit verbal and be able to understand the instructions for the trial and be healthy, we didn't see much difference, even though there was a huge difference in socioeconomic profile of the folks in Sao Paulo versus the folks in the United States. Anyway, this was the flow chart for our trial. As I mentioned, we started with 185, 25 were excluded, and some of that exclusion happened because the pandemic hit at the very end of our trial. So 6 of them had to be excluded just because we had to halt all the procedures during the COVID-19 pandemic. We end up randomizing 160, and basically in the end we analyzed 73 with that were in the Memantine arm and 76 in the placebo arm. You can see that there were some issues that were related to having Memantine that led them to leave the trial, but there were also some issues that you'd imagine were related to Memantine, like behavioral issues that made us lose individuals in the placebo arm of the trial. And that shows you how important it is to do randomized placebo trials. And part of it was probably because some of those individuals were quite anxious because they were participating in a clinical trial after all. I mean, those are the characteristics of, oh, that's still in Portuguese because I just gave a talk in Brazil regarding the trial, and I forgot to translate that the characteristics of the participants in the clinical trial into English. But them. You will not see the difference in socioeconomic status because they had to be, they basically, each site had the placebos inside the site. So basically you didn't need to compare sites for this trial. And as I mentioned, they were fairly healthy with only the typical comorbidities that you see in folks with Down syndrome, like hypothyroidism and obesity, sleep apnea, and even diabetes. We didn't get much in that population. We had 3 people in the Memantine group, but nobody in the placebo group who had any signs and symptoms of diabetes. So anyway, in the end of the day, after all that work, after 7 years of recruiting people, because it's very hard to recruit people in this population, as many people will be able to tell you, we got this result. Basically, there was no difference between the placebo and the Memantine trial, arms of the study, I mean, and basically the way you look at those curves is, or those graphs, is if something like the symbol and this bar is outside this midline to the right, it's a beneficial effect. If it's to the left, it basically favors the placebo arm of the study, and therefore it kind of shows that the drug is maybe even causing something that's not good. So, and basically, as you can see, there was no significant effect whatsoever. So this was technically a negative trial. And in terms of adverse events, we didn't see any difference also between the 2 arms, meaning that Memantine was very well tolerated at this dose. And so, to summarize, we observed no significant improvement for the Memantine arm compared to the placebo group, neither on the primary nor on the secondary outcome measures. But Memantine was well tolerated with infrequent mild to moderate adverse events noted. So you can imagine that when I got those results, this was about March of last year, about a year ago, I was quite depressed, right? So, and then we got some lab tests. We got some lab back because one of the things that we assessed to were plasma levels of Memantine. And basically, if you look at therapeutic levels of Memantine, what you expect is a range between 0.5 and 1 micromole per liter as being the therapeutic range for Memantine in folks with Alzheimer's. And if you look at our participants, basically the mean value, and still in Portuguese again, I apologize for that. The mean value was 0.37 micromole per liter in our participant group. And this here being the therapeutic range, you can see that over 90% of our participants fell below the therapeutic range, with only very few people, just about 1/3 of them, being even above this 0.4 range that is at least close to this therapeutic range. So we decided to do this post hoc exploratory analysis of individuals that had at least that little close to the therapeutic level of Memantine to see if they were any different than those other folks that had lower levels of Memantine. After all, I mean, a drug cannot have an effect if it's not affecting its target, in this case, the NMDA receptors. So we did that analysis, and before I show you the results, I wanted to go back to those mouse results from many years ago. And in that study that we published in Neuropsychopharmacology, we used 5 milligrams per kilogram in the mouse. And that translated to roughly 1.7 micromole or micromole per liter in those animals. Luckily, a few years ago, I had a very, very talented student who was able to look at the memantine levels on the mice. And we didn't have those results beforehand, and we only had therapeutic actual levels of memantine in folks with Down syndrome after this present study. So you have to compare 0.37, as I mentioned, to 1.7. So what we use in the mice was about 5 times higher doses of memantine than what we use in people with Down syndrome. So as we go back to that exploratory analysis where we had at least 0.4, and that's not milli, but micromoles of memantine per liter, you now, if you just look at that subgroup of individuals that had reasonably high levels of memantine, and those were 23 people in the memantine arm, and compared to 23 people that were age matched in the placebo group. And you can see that our primary measure now has a highly significant value. So we did see an effect. And remember, I told you that the second measure that in our pilot study that actually was above that 0.5 effect size was the digit span. We also saw a significant effect in there. And at that point, I mean, my mood changed considerably for the better. We were able to fairly quickly write up this thing and submit to Lancet Neurology. And if you think in terms of, in practical terms, again, the work of Andres Stryton, newer work of Andres Stryton's group, kind of informs us a little bit in terms of what could potentially be the importance of something like that if we were to find out that, for example, memantine has a positive effect. In a recent review of a lot of people who actually have taken standard treatment for Alzheimer's, they actually have seen a 3-year survival advantage of being treated versus not being treated for Alzheimer's in the Down syndrome population. So they tended to live about 3 years longer if they took either memantine or anticholinesterase alone, or a combination of anticholinesterase and memantine. So, so there's potentially something in there. I can't tell you that any of that is really showing any results, since what I showed to you were based on post hoc exploratory analysis. But deep down under, the scientist in me is actually asking the question, maybe we are just like in the foot of a typical sigmoidal dose response curve. And if we increase the dose of memantine, we might see a bigger effect. But alternatively, we may be just close to the peak of a inverted U-shaped curve, and if we increase the dose of memantine, we might actually have diminishing returns, and maybe even a negative effect of memantine. So we don't know yet. We can't make any kind of recommendation based on the data so far, except to say that a dose-finding study to find the ideal doses of memantine in persons with Down syndrome would be a very interesting thing, and I'm currently looking for funding sources for that study. And I would like to close it up here by letting you know that throughout our studies, and it's important that we emphasize that people should adhere very strictly to neuroethical principles, and they include autonomy and dignity of clinical trial participants, identity preservation, which is very critical, mainly for a group of individuals that have limited ability to consent to be in trials, the very principle of beneficence and non-maleficence, which are the cornerstones of medical practice. And reversibility of treatment would be a very important topic here. Basically using treatments that you know, and from all the animal studies that have been performed, the effects of memantine, for example, are highly reversible. If memantine is not present in the preclinical studies in the mouse, basically the mouse ability or their memory and learning goes back to pre-treatment levels. So it's very reversible, so you're not causing lasting changes to those individuals. And it's critical in order to follow all that we basically go by small steps in terms of doing our trials. So as I mentioned to you, we started with T0 type of studies, meaning that they were preclinical studies. It evolved into T1, T2 types of studies where we did a pilot study. We advanced to a larger study, and eventually what we truly need in this field, once we have identified and basically verified that a target is a good target, is to do studies where we look at quality of life. Because seeking for improvements in quality of life of those with Down syndrome is not ableism, because quality of life involves, it's completely involves health, work, material well-being, a sense of belonging in the community, a sense of security, environmental quality, emotional well-being, and improvement in social relationships. I apologize that this slide is not working very well, but basically you get the message that eventually that's what we are supposed to be basically looking for, is truly quality of life of those individuals. And that's obviously the ultimate goal of my research, and that's the ultimate goal of the research of all of those colleagues of mine at T21RS who are doing responsible clinical research at present. So please remember, it's no use burying your head in the sand. We as a community have to produce, participate in or support research in the Down syndrome area. And that's the only way that this area is going to advance forward. As I mentioned to you, it does seem like we hit a plateau in terms of biological achievement of those individuals with Down syndrome. And it's only if we go beyond that plateau that we're going to see any difference. And I'm obviously a very optimistic person because otherwise I wouldn't have dedicated 25 years of my career toward that goal. This is basically the group here in Cleveland. Some of you may actually recognize some of those folks. Nancy Roizen is here. She's one of the best recognized clinicians in the Down syndrome field. There are some other luminaries present in there, very senior, very good people that work with us. This is the Brazilian group. I can say the same thing. The Albert Einstein Hospital in Brazil is an excellent facility, is basically listed as number 37 in the world best hospital list. So it's a very high quality place to do research too. And again, this is my group and the clinical team and the collaborators. The Alana Foundation, which is a nonprofit foundation, was the foundation that supported most of this research. My research is also supported by all those other groups, and I hope I didn't go too much beyond my allotted time, and I wish to thank you, and I'd like to open it up for questions.
Thank you, Alberto, for your nice presentation. That is a great presentations that enlighten us a lot of things regarding the treatment of Alzheimer's among the individuals with Down syndrome.
Angelo, it's the first time you have heard that presentation. What do you have to say?
and this is our opportunity to hear from your end. Our Indian chapter is very active chapter, and we used to organize several programs, not only the scientific talk and webinar, but also some social activities and extension activities.
Are you talking? I can't hear anything that anybody's saying.
Yeah, I think there is little problem. Can you hear me?
Okay, sorry, my headphone went off, I guess. I can hear you now.
Yeah, we have few questions from the audience.
I was afraid everybody was had no questions, so I was sorry, my headphone went off. Question, please.
The first question is, how much do you think the environmental factor will affect Down syndrome, especially after post-pandemic era?
Well, I think environmental factors are critical. We've seen that here in the United States and the UK and a lot of other countries that basically had folks with Down syndrome that grew up outside the community, that grew up. There is some feedback going on. But that grew up out of the community and without early intervention. And it's easy to compare those individuals because we have historical data, and we have basically I'd say, if you look at the historical data and you can actually make a comparisons, an apple-to-apple comparison, there was about a 15-point IQ improvement with all those new interventions. So people who grow up in the community, who benefit from early intervention, they do better. But the thing is, at some point, you sort of hit a limit. And that's what I was talking about. Yes, I think the environment is very important. It's just that at one point, we hit a limit. That's all I'm saying. It's not that the environment is not important. The environment is key. And we have people with Down syndrome doing the most extraordinary things nowadays. And that's kind of what T21 today is all about. It's all about basically celebrating the achievements, the amazing achievements of individuals with Down syndrome. But the thing is, we don't want that to be just related to an exception of individuals with Down syndrome. We want it to be basically extended to every or most of the individuals with Down syndrome, because for every person with Down syndrome that's doing wonderful things nowadays, there is like a person with Down syndrome who is not even verbal right now. So, so basically, the idea here is to improve quality of life for all. And I think the next step is really dependent on research, and I think it will be the next chapter for folks with Down syndrome. But yes, environment is critical, and it's very important. But in places like Sao Paulo, that has a developmental level in terms of a quality of life and exposure to early intervention and to inclusion that's similar to the United States. That's why I think those two populations are very close, because they both hit a very similar level of being in a good environment. So.
Thank you, Alberto. And the next question is, has hippocampal gyrus direct relations with the memory?
Hippocampus what?
Hippocampal gyrus has relation with memory.
With memantine?
Memory.
Oh, with memory? Oh, yes. Hippocampal function is very related to memory, and basically the hippocampus is sort of this place where short-term memories get translated into long-term memories. In terms of spatial guidance, in terms of overall memory for, not memory, but basically a spatial spatial recognition and spatial navigation. Those things are very correlated between episodic memory and navigation. So that's why they basically get measured in a concomitant way, because one thing is very related to another thing. So I think that I'm answering the question, but I'm not positive either.
And the third question is, if protein plaque formation is the cause of decrease in IQ in Alzheimer's syndrome, then what is the cause of decrease in IQ in Down syndrome? And to what extent is it related to the genetics or epigenetics?
Well, if you look at the Alzheimer's field, and for the longest time, the folks in the Alzheimer's field, they basically blame the plaques for everything, right? And basically, some people make their living out of trying to bust plaques. And we've seen recently that just destroying the plaques doesn't solve Alzheimer's. And I would tell you that probably the same thing is true in Down syndrome. The plaques might just be a consequence of the underlying disorder. And in both Down syndrome and in Alzheimer's disease itself, there might be other factors. Obviously, we all have our theories of how it comes about, but neuroinflammation is a big candidate for that, and that precedes the formation of plaques. We do see in folks with Alzheimer's many times that they do show some of the signs of memory loss way before the plaques are present, sometimes as long as 15 years. And in Down syndrome, because they have all the biology there already from the get-go, I'd say that part of their intellectual deficits may be related to having that Alzheimer's type of pathology from the very get-go. But if that happens in the overall environment of development, a developing brain is a very robust thing, and it's able to handle a lot of injury. You can see that in the field of neurosurgery and epilepsy. Sometimes people have focal epilepsy, and you take as much as half of their cortex out. And if you do that very early on in their development, they're able to basically grow up to be almost perfectly functioning adults. And even though you took half of their brain out, because it's happening in the course of development. So a developing brain is a very robust thing. So if the Alzheimer type of pathology is happening during the course of that developing brain, I think the brain can take a lot of injury. But I think basically some of it may be Alzheimer's related, but some of it may be Down syndrome related by itself. There are certain things that are not Alzheimer's in Down syndrome. And that's what we have to tease apart. And that's why it's so important to keep funding basic research, so we know the factors that actually lead to intellectual disability in Down syndrome. Some of them may be Alzheimer's related, and some of them may not be Alzheimer's related at all. Is it only me again?
Thank you. Thank
you.
That's... and the last question from me is just a simple question. Can Memantine improve the cognitive ability of Down syndrome, those who are not having Alzheimer?
Well, that was the very question that we were trying to answer with our clinical trial. One interesting thing about our mouse model is that it never developed Alzheimer's type of pathology, except for degeneration of certain types of cholinergic neurons and noradrenergic neurons. They never developed the plaques. And that's why I tried young mice and old mice, and it worked well in both of them. And that's why we did a trial that was on individuals that were 32 and younger, exactly to be before the Alzheimer's had any impact on them. The Alzheimer's trial was done by Andres' group. We were not addressing Alzheimer's at all in our trial. We're basically looking at just cognition unrelated or potentially unrelated to Alzheimer's, with the caveat that we do think that some of the Alzheimer's biology may be causing some of the neurocognitive deficits in folks with Down syndrome from the get-go, but that's another story. That's a personal opinion. But the thing is, that's what our trial tried to solve. And as you saw, basically using typical levels or typical doses of Memantine, you don't get there. It doesn't work. The question is whether if we can use higher doses of Memantine, if it will work. We don't have the answer to that question. We don't want to go head on to do like a twofold dose on a large group of individuals with Down syndrome, because we don't want to expose those folks to that high dose. Remember, that's why I talked about all those neuroethical principles. We don't want to cause harm to people, and that's why people shouldn't try that at home. Try high doses of Memantine. Memantine has been used in high doses for other neurological disorders, like migraine and neuropathic pain, for example, but it hasn't been used in folks with Down syndrome. So we don't know if they can tolerate high doses of memantine. And that's why we're trying to get funding now to do a small trial to see if individuals with Down syndrome tolerate high doses of memantine as well as they did the low doses. And that's the trial that will basically inform the next trial that will answer your question. But before that, we don't have an answer to your question. We have no evidence right now.
Thank you, Alberto. Thank you once again for being with us, and hope you have enjoyed the sessions and the talk that you have delivered with this ambience from Trisomy 21 Research Society Indian chapter.
Well, again, thank you very much for the invitation. It's been a pleasure talking to you guys. It's a brand new audience. And with 20,000 people being born with Down syndrome every year in India, I think when we are ready for a very large trial, I think India would definitely be a place to come to and to try things, right? But we're not there yet. Unfortunately, I have to say that. But I hope we're there soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, so now this is a time to hear from Angelo Carfi from Italy. And may I request Professor Papia Ghosh to introduce Angelo to our audience.
Thank you, Dr. Ghosh. Am I audible? Am I
Yeah,
audible?
we can hear. We can hear.
So I would be again privileged to introduce our next speaker of today's webinar, Dr. Angelo Carfi. He is the MD, faculty member at the Department of Geriatrics, Fondazione Policlinico Universitario, Italy. Sir is awarded with Innovation Award at the First World Inter-RAI Conference 2016, Toronto. Sir has professional membership of the Inter-RAI Network on Mental Health and as Trisomy 21 Research Society. Dr. Carfi has published more than 52 papers in top journals, some of which include eClinical Medicine, American Journal of Medical Genetics, etc. So it will be our privilege to hear from your end, sir. The screen is with you. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm honored to be part of this webinar, and I speak from Italy. I'm Italian, and so I will try to do my best with the English. And I ask for apologies since the inception of the talk. Now I will try to share my screen. Hope you will be able to. Yeah, okay. Are you able to see my full screen?
It's visible.
Okay, so I put many slides all together and try to at least share my experience with Down syndrome. I'm a geriatrician as a background, but since at least 7 to 10 years, I'm dealing with adults with Down syndrome. And I usually I am invited to talk after people who talks a lot about Alzheimer's disease, and this is very good because Alberto Costa, Professor Costa, talked extensively about Alzheimer's, so I'm relieved from that burden, which is very, very important. So I will talk about the other challenges we face when we try to take care of people with Down syndrome. So just geolocalization. Can you see this other slide?
Yeah.
I hope. Okay. So 2 stars. One should be close to Calcutta, and the other one is close to my place in Europe, in Italy. and I have the privilege to live in a very beautiful city, which is Rome, is the home of the ancient Romans and also the head of the Catholic Church. So it's a very beautiful place. And there's also big hospitals. I happen to work in one of these in the city. Where you see the blue stars, there's a very little outpatient clinic dedicated to adults with Down syndrome. And this is how the clinic looks like. Here's my colleague with some adults who live in group homes. And in your right, you should be able to see one of our patients. She's the eldest one at the moment. She's 72 right now. And so this is the kind of population we see. And the range is from 18 to this very patient. So a lot of diverse challenges. So I also apologize for the Western culture-oriented selection of music and records, but I didn't have the culture to translate this in Indian. Anyways, it's very good music if you are interested in it. And I will use this as an outline to go ahead in the talk. Please interrupt me in any place. So we start with Bob Dylan, and times they are changing. So this is because we have some old ideas which should be changed in the Down syndrome science and healthcare. So, and this is another first thing to say. The Down syndrome usually leads the way, and many other complex patients could follow. This is me in the clinic with a young lady with Prader-Willi syndrome. And then there's also Fragile X, Williams syndrome, tuberous sclerosis complex. But the Down syndrome is the leading way to these complex syndromes, in my opinion. So the first old idea is that we usually associate Down syndrome with a pediatric condition. Here, this is the picture of Jérôme Lejeune, the great scientist that linked the Down syndrome with Trisomy 21. He was a geneticist and a pediatrician. And now I want to challenge your let's say, imagination of Down syndrome with this new data from the United States. And here, with the red dotted line, I highlight the age of the 18 years old of age. So if you can see my pointer here, or at least look at the 1950s, you see that a great percentage of subjects with Down syndrome belonged to the pediatrician, while very few subjects were above the age of 19. But the situation, at least 10 years ago, was very different, with a lot of prevalence of subjects in the young group, but also a lot and even more people in the adult side of this curve. But while it is clear who is going to take care of these people under the age of 18, it's not that clear who should be taking care of people in this other stage. So this is other data from the US, and we go ahead in the epidemiology. If you see the full black line here is the life expectancy and estimated survival in the 20s. And as you can see, a lot of people, the 90% of the people, the population with Down syndrome was dying before age 20 in the 1920s. And the situation is completely different in the 2010, where, as you can see, a lot of people gets to the age of, let's say, 50s and 60 and 70. So you can see that there's a typical stretch of the survival curves toward the upper right corner of the graphic, and this is the same thing that happens in the general population, as you can see in the other panel. It seems like there's a sort of record of for the age which we could fix at 70 years, but there's much more part of the population that reaches that threshold. And we have to say that there has been an incredible boost in survival due to, I think, the pediatric care of people with Down syndrome, which was awesome and achieved great results. And in this other part of the curve, maybe there's still a lot to do. These are the Italian data. You are not interested in that, but the main point is that the situation is basically the same. So what happens when the person with Down syndrome gets to 18 years of age and 1 day? And I using here the Rolling Stones, I can get no satisfaction, because it's a very hard time for families, because there's something missing. There's a gap in the health in the health checks, in the health care of these people. And so families, for instance, and caregivers feel abandoned as their relatives and assisted people reach the age 18 and are dropped out by pediatricians. And what usually happens is that families and subjects go ahead receiving the care from pediatric-oriented doctors who are very skilled on Down syndrome. And so this is a very big gap of care, and as you saw in the epidemiologic curves, there's need to take care of these people, because these people is very abundant as a prevalence. So what happens? I'm sorry, the slide, I did a mess with the slides. So what happens? Who will take care of me? Who will take care of people with Down syndrome when they reach the age? Is there anybody out there beyond the limit of 18 years old? So what happens? Why these people sort of creates a void, vacuum of healthcare around them? So this is, let me just, you can hear me correctly? Yeah, please. I just see my screen, so please give me feedback if I'm doing something wrong. Okay, you can stop me in any time. So this is one of our clinic papers is just to show how many people in the adult age has 2 or more comorbidities. The diagnosis at the same time. So 92% of our subjects have 2 or more diagnoses after the age 40. And as you can see in these 2 pyramids, in the left, you have the prevalence of diagnosis in Down syndrome, and on the right, you see how many drugs these people are prescribed in the adult age, and if you see these graphics in blue, you see the Down syndrome curve, and in red the general population curve, and you can easily see that for many disorders and conditions, there's an anticipated onset of disease, and in many instances there's also a faster and a higher prevalence of disease with the age. And this is another example. So we talked about Alzheimer's disease before with Professor Costa. And how about to make a clinical diagnosis of cognitive deterioration in a person with Down syndrome? It's much more complicated than in the general population, because we have symptoms which are shared by both the intellectual disability and also the neuropsychiatric comorbidities. So it is much more difficult to distinguish which is belonging to what. And so, what are the characteristics of this sort of alien physician or alien healthcare provider which should be assessing the persons with Down syndrome? So here the first point is that it has to know the Down syndrome. He has to be studying Down syndrome and has to have a dedicated knowledge. And then the second point is a physician of the complexity. So this is the main point which I would like to stress. And complexity, in my opinion, is the first keyword to memorize today from my presentation, is the complexity that creates this sort of void, this sort of vacuum of healthcare around people with Down syndrome in the adult age. So let's talk a little bit about the medicine of complexity. So first keyword, apart of complexity, is function. Okay, this is a paper which I really am really fond of because it's nothing special, but in the title I really wanted to put the word complexity, and this is from our group, and is a sort of manifesto where we described how to, in a complex situation, how to have an orientation, how to let's say find your compass and to aim at a certain place where you want to go with your patients. So this is a sketch of how we usually are taught the medical skills in medical school. So we have the patient who comes, and you do the history, you do the physical examination, you do some complementary tests, and then you achieve medical diagnosis, and then you propose a treatment. You can do this with pneumonia or appendicitis, whatever you choose. But in a complex situation, as in adults with Down syndrome, which really resemble complex older adults, where you have comorbidities and cognitive deficits and functional problems, social problems, disability, this standard medical assessment is not enough, in our opinion. So you need the so-called multidimensional comprehensive evaluation, where you don't only do your history and physical examination, but you also try to assess function. Because together with medical diagnosis, together with medical treatments, you need to understand what is the physical function like for that person, what is the mental function, what is the social function. And if you want to choose wisely and engineer an effective treatment for that person, you have to take into account all these dimensions of the person. So we use an instrument which is part of a suite of instruments which is called the Inter-Eye Intellectual Disability tool. It's contains over 350 data elements, items, and so it's a very thorough interview of the patients and assesses all those functioning areas which I mentioned before. I don't want to bother you with all this presentation on this, but I just wanted to show that this tool can really help you measure what's going on in your patients, if they fall, if they require assistance in the activities of daily living, if they have psychiatric condition, hearing problems, aggressive behaviors. This instrument can help you understand the healthcare utilization of the persons. This can also provide some synthetic scales of global functioning. Here is some data from, let's say, 250 patients from our clinic divided by decade. And it's just to showcase the capabilities of trying to also measuring the function of this subject. This is mood and cognition scales and social domains. We also were able to, using these instruments, to show some impact, for instance, of the lockdowns we had in Italy for the coronavirus pandemic. And the nice thing is that we don't only have the instruments for the adult patients, but we also have the respectives for the pediatrics. And this could be very helpful also in bringing forward the transition from pediatric to adult care. So the second keyword I want to say is gain and prioritization, which is very, very, very important in the medicine of complexity. We sometimes, when we are in complex environments, with complex patients as those with Down syndrome, we cannot trigger a specialist for every kind of problem they have. We have to think to our intervention, prioritizing only those things that could push forward the functioning of the person we have in front of us. And sometimes less is more. So you activate less specialists or no specialists, and you just choose the few things which are very, very important for the person. And I want to show this is just to be funny, but we have to understand the vision of healthcare providers and the differences between the vision from the families. For a family and a family member with a person with Down syndrome, everything is sort of flat. Which means that the Alzheimer's disease or the cognitive impairment could go along with other problems, let's say skin problems, or the person is losing the hair, or they have flat foot and there's this kind of problem. While the healthcare providers have to think in, or even the researchers have to be very, very with a pointed mind. They have to think about gain, which part can be, what are as I said before, what are the things that really are able to provide, to give some gain in functioning or gain in quality of life or in relief of symptoms for that person. So when doctors like me talk with families or researchers talk with family, we have to make these two visions come together, and the doctor has to spend some time to give his own vision and to let's say make a plan together with the family. And in each phase of the life and each phase of the functioning, the sort of gain the person can achieve is very, very different. So in a person, let's say in a young adult, we can just stay here in health promotion and prevention. And at the beginning, or you know, we can for some instances we can offer prolongation interventions which can prolong life, or later that can maintain function. And at a certain stage, we have to focus on just the maximization of comfort. So in each phase, things really change, and healthcare providers has to be aware of this. And there are other things in the complexity world. I just wanted to show this this slide, which is colorful and very nice. And sometimes in complexity, with complex patients, such as those with Alzheimer's disease or with Down syndrome, we have poor coordination between healthcare professionals. And so it is very important, for instance, to have a case manager, someone who facilitates doctors to talk to each other, or families to be able to reach the doctors, because as you understand, as you know, doctors have their own schedule and they don't want to talk to anybody, basically. And in a busy place, which is Rome, but I guess also Calcutta could be the same, it is difficult to access to the care. And so the technocare services could be very, very important for to provide in the complex situations. And the fragmentation of care is basically what I talked about so far. So the comprehensive assessment is very, very important. And also the disempowerment is the feeling of families, of caregivers, which in front of complex situations are exactly don't know what to do, how to deal with things. And we should empower them, make group meetings and training in order to give them the instruments that science and knowledge provide us. I'm not going to talk about behavioral and psychological aspects, which are, and as I said before, about the dementia, which is the main concern and a major and challenge in our job. But I go directly to the lifespan interventions. We have to consider also the end of life of these persons. And this is very relevant in our clinic. We have the chance to connect our patients as long as we understand that we cannot follow them enough, that we can activate the hospice care. We have some end-of-life care, which is very important. So the take-home messages about what I talked about is this strange healthcare provided, so this sort of alien that has to be, needs to take care of the adults because there's a lot of them, and because of the great work of the pediatricians, and we need to take care of them. These adults are complex, and this complexity creates difficulties in people, in healthcare providers. So we need some specialists that deal with these subjects. And since they are complex, we think that global function is the main orientation, and it is essential also to make the decision that lead to a profit for the person, and to make interventions which promote gain or maintenance of functioning. And we don't have to forget about the end of life. So I will stop my presentation here, because maybe it is also nice if we go ahead and with some question and answers, and otherwise I will bother you a lot more. And I have other slides, but maybe they're not interested, or maybe I can show them if you want. And thank you very much for your attention. Again, apologize for my sick English. Please.
Thank you, Angelo. For you can show the other slides which are interested for. We are hearing from you.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So just 1 minute. And so let's go ahead. Some extras. We have other internal medicine challenges except behavior and challenges and dementia. We have sensory problem. We were investigating some of these in our group. We compared, as you can see in this, these box plots. The dark ones are from our sample of people with Down syndrome. This is based on measurements from, let's say, 80 persons. And we compared with a huge American database, which is called the NAINS, which is very useful. And we compared the thresholds of hearing in an average, pure tone average, PTA, in an average of frequencies of hearing in people with Down syndrome compared to American general population, and we divided in decade. And we also studied some specific frequencies. These are the high frequencies, which are those that your grandfather loses first. So you have to raise up the volume if you want to be heard. And As you can see, people with Down syndrome are prone to develop some hearing impairment and also a selective loss of high frequencies, which are thought to be a sort of neurologic aging of the hearing system. Another area of study in our clinic is the bone problems. This is the we study osteoporosis, which is, as you can see in this panel here, is the modification of the bone structure, which becomes much more empty, and so the bone becomes lighter and also more fragile, and you can have a diagnosis of osteoporosis, and we do the same trick. We did the same trick also in this study, which is not yet published, unfortunately, even if it's ready from many years. And as you can see, there's a high prevalence of osteoporosis in Down syndrome. So this is, of course, obviously of genetic origin, and here's another vision of the same problem. Here in red, you have the Down syndrome, and this is the prevalence of osteoporosis. And these are all the bone mineral densities from the main study in purple and in red from our sample. And as you can see, the prevalence of osteoporosis is higher in Down syndrome, and there's some gender differences. This is in the femoral neck, and this is what happens in the lumbar spine. So we could discuss about this. This is another challenge here is that we have drugs for osteoporosis, but actually we don't know exactly if these people, when they have osteoporosis, they actually develop bone fractures. So we should be treating and making, how do you say, prevent bone fractures, not treating the bone mineral density, basically. And so there's a great uncertainty whether you should treat these people or not. Another thing is sarcopenia. So the body composition in Down syndrome is kind of different. And I don't know what's your experience in my clinic. I have very healthy young people, bodybuilders and athletes, but also together there are some very weak and muscle deprived people. So we wanted to study some data about sarcopenia, and we need to learn more. There's we don't know actually what's going on with the sarcopenia and Down syndrome. Maybe the males are more affected. Sarcopenia, for those who are not familiar with, is the selective leaning and weakening of skeletal muscle compared to fat. So you can imagine a person with Down syndrome, which is usually very smiley and round, with a round face and with the fat. And sometimes this fat usually goes along with a lot of muscles, but sometimes not. So we need to understand better. These are data show some research we are doing recently. This is under review, and we hope to be able to deliver the paper as soon as we can. And this is the antibody response to the to the Pfizer vaccination for coronavirus. And we took some controls, which are healthcare workers in our hospital and people with Down syndrome in blue. So healthcare workers in green and people with Down syndrome in blue. And we checked the antibody titers at the baseline, the day they received the first shot of vaccine, and then the day before receiving the second dose of the vaccine, and after completion of the 21 days after completion, and 6 months after completion of the vaccine. And as you can see, there's two messages here. One is good, which is that people with Down syndrome have an actual response of antibodies to the vaccination. And the not so nice news is that the response seemed to be lower compared to the general population. So we need to understand better whether this could impair the protection which is given by the vaccination, or it's just not an important factor. So in any case, in our clinic and also with the other experts in the T21RS Society, we sponsor, we support the booster doses in Down syndrome. And another very big challenge in our job is also the so-called regression or disintegrative disorders, or there are different names, and it's very challenging because in an age that goes from, let's say, 15 years to, let's say, 30 years, there could happen an important sort of mood disorder that swallows all the success, all the improvements, all the function the person gained through the development. And people who were able to talk fluently, they basically shut up for 1-2 years. People who was very social closes down, and the mood goes down, and there's a sort of extreme depression. This is a behavioral disorders that is really challenging to treat and to assess. And I just wanted to mention this because it is very, very challenging, even because there's some researchers that think that this is a sort of psychiatric problem. But there are also some data which suggest that this could be related to inflammatory disease. And so there's people who is able to treat this effectively, let's say, with electroshock, while there is other people who is able to treat this effectively with high doses of corticosteroids and immunosuppressants. So this is what I just wanted to say is basically all that we do in our clinic, and this is my own experience. And so thank you again for your patience and your attention.
Thank you, Angelo, for your nice presentation. And now it's a time for questions. We have 3 questions. The first question is, from which age of the Down syndrome the family member need to be concerned regarding their geriatric deteriorations of health?
Regarding the
Regarding the deteriorations of health and geriatric onset.
So I structure my assessments as follows. While you are under the age of 40, basically you just need to just go to what the basic assessments, because what you need is that you live your life and you do whatever your life brings you. And after the age of 40, otherwise you are not running a clinical trial, you should go check your specialist for adults every year, because you enter the gray area where the let's say the cognitive deterioration could happen. And so this is mainly my suggestion. So you can consider the patient from 18 to 35, 38, I don't know, to be like healthy subjects with some special attention. Let's say, if the person has a hypothyroidism, the main thing would be to check the thyroid stimulating hormone every now and then, and fix the levothyroxine. But that's it. And you know that there's a specialist that can make suggestions should you need it, but you don't have to go and check every time with the doctor. This is also because these persons already had a lot of hospital and a lot of clinic and a lot of assessment. We don't want to bother people for nothing. They could gain nothing from that. And so it is important to point that the most important part is in their life. So live your life, go have a job, go do the theater, the actor, do whatever. And after the age of 40, the thing is a little bit different, and you just come, we do the checkup, and then you go. And you know that we are there, but we want to check with you with more close time. I don't know if I answered, but this could be. Yeah, I want to stress that the most important part as you are young is to go live. This is the main message. Also because maybe you know that when you go to seek a doctor, the doctor finds something, and then there's a bad chain of reactions that goes ahead, and you don't want to do that.
Well, the second question is there any specific symptoms or behavioral alterations from which family member would conscious about the onset of Alzheimer among the Down syndrome?
Oh yeah, so this is the question. Maybe Alberto is the best one to talk about this. You can have, so in the standard Alzheimer's disease in the aged population, let's say the sporadic Alzheimer's disease, we know from some friends or some parents, the main thing, The first thing is working memory loss, let's say, or the memory of the short-term memory of the events. What did you have for dinner last night? I don't remember. Okay, so that is the point. And the other one is to remember the names, for instance. So it's memory, short-term memory and language. In Down syndrome, the presentation is very diverse and could be a change in behavior or in mood could be the harbinger of cognitive deterioration, even if the person is cognitively intact, but maybe the behavior just changed a little bit. Maybe procedures which were very familiar and very deeply learned, they're not that easy as it was before. Maybe sometimes the person just was singing a lot all the time because he liked music and singing, and now he does it a little bit in a different way without the enthusiasm. So, or a new behavior comes out, or a behavioral problem which needs some attention. So these are. There's a researcher in Holland whose name is Alain Decker, who developed a scale to assess the first symptoms of Alzheimer's with just behavioral problems. So it's more complicated, and it depends highly on the level of achievements of function that this person got in his development. Because in Down syndrome we have, as Alberto said before, we have actors, as we can have people who are barely able to talk. So there's huge differences, bigger differences, which we usually see in the general population, where a farmer and a full professor at the university basically can do the same tasks, and so it's the, how do you say, the span is much bigger in Down syndrome, the spanning of function. And yeah, so, and the other thing is the epilepsy. There's a sort of epileptic myoclonus, myoclonic epilepsy, which can arrive before, in the meantime, or after the diagnosis of Alzheimer's. So it can be like some sort of little jerks, usually in the morning. And this could be also signs that should not be overlooked and should trigger further evaluation by some doctors, some neurologists, or some specialists of the adults.
The next question is, does Down syndrome individuals suffer from increasing visual impairment with age?
Suffer with?
Suffer from visual impairment with age.
So visual impairment is the most common problem in Down syndrome. It is surpassed just by the intellectual disability, which is 100% in prevalence. And correct me, Alberto, if I say it wrong, but it's 100% the intellectual disability, or something like that.
Oh, very close, yeah.
Or pretty close. And then there's some sort of visual impairment. Visual impairments are many and diverse. We have in each part of the eye, there can be some problems. Usually we have maybe I'm not able to say it correctly in English, but astigmatism or myopia or hypermetropia, or you have keratoconus, you can have congenital cataracts, and you can have nystagmus and strabismus, and so you name it, and it is very, very frequent, but the deterioration itself is usually treatable. You usually can have some eyeglasses, or you can also have some surgery for keratoconus and for cataracts, for instance, which are very, very effective. And so in our clinic, our suggestion is that you should intervene, and you should intervene as soon as you can to tackle these problems, because as long as you provide the best stimuli for your brain, the better you go ahead and preserve brain functioning.
And the last very obvious question from the audience: are people with Down syndrome more vulnerable to the COVID bacteria?
Yeah, here in this webinar, there's excellent speakers for this, as we published all together the paper, which states that the risk of adverse events from COVID-19 in people with Down syndrome is higher, and it ranges from 3 times to 10 times more than the general population, according to different studies which were made around the globe. And most important factors are age and cognitive dysfunction, Alzheimer's disease, and obesity, and heart surgery, if I remember correctly. And so it's an interplay between the genetics of the Down syndrome, the complexity of the clinical management of people with Down syndrome, and the coronavirus itself, and how they interact, and the most important part is how they interact in the inflammatory and cascade and in the coagulation cascade, which is very important.
May I ask you a question, Angela? Excellent talk. One thing that you said that was quite interesting was the whole thing of not treating bone density in folks with Down syndrome, because we don't have the evidence for fractures. And so 2 things on that. One is there a level of osteopenia in which you kind of, oh my God, I mean, this is really low, I better treat it? And number 2 is we have a similar situation with lipid profiles that many times are kind of in the negative side in folks with Down syndrome, older folks with Down syndrome. But on the other hand, we don't have many cardiovascular events happening in that population. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on that, on the statins, and if there is a threshold at which you treat osteopenia.
So thank you very much, Alberto. And you got the exact same topics. So what should we do when we don't actually know the strong outcomes of what we do? So the strong outcome for osteoporosis is bone fracture, and we don't have reliable data on bone fracture prevalence in people with Down syndrome. And what should we do with heart cardiovascular risk factors in Down syndrome, which could be obesity and bad lipid profile and sedentary lifestyle for many. When we don't have, we have data that cardiovascular disease is very, very low in prevalence in Down syndrome. So my opinion is that we should, the clinic is first. So in cardiovascular conditions, since I think that the main thing is that they don't have hypertension, they have very, very low average levels of blood pressure. So they are some sort of protected from cardiovascular events. And I usually try to simplify the drugs schedule, and I try not to treat with the statins, and you usually individualize. I don't have data, so I don't think we can have data at our side in this very topic, but you can use your judgment and say, okay, this is too bad, and you don't show this to any other doctor, otherwise they're going to act in a strange way. So you could choose to treat, but I usually don't treat for statins. And for the osteoporosis, there's an eyeballing evaluation, which is very, very important to me. If you see a person which is walking on his own and maybe has some other problems as a walking problem, and very easily you guess that he or she can fall down and has a bad physical performance, maybe it is wise to try to do something for their bones. And a Z-score or a T-score, usually they go most the same way. Below -3 could be a good point, but you should also. I apologize if I get too technical, but there's also a bone measurement adjustment, which is bone mineral, not density, but volume density, which should be assessed because of the small stature of the people with Down syndrome. So the biometrics are a little bit different, and DEXA scans usually can underestimate the bone density. So after you do the corrections and you do the volumetric density of the bone, and you find a Z-score which is below -3, and you see people who easily could fall down and fracture, then you are willing to treat. And now the big question is, how should I treat these persons? My choice is usually the Nozumab treatment with the Nozumab. Is a biological, very well tolerated drug, which is very, very safe and very easy to administer. And it doesn't bother the patient because you have to make a shot every 6 months. So it's quite easy to administer and to take. Basically, you forget you are doing this treatment, and it doesn't bother your daily life.
That's wonderful. That's great. I would just like to add, in terms of basic procedures that people are thinking about in terms of as people age. I think one important thing, there are two important things to consider. One is at that age 40, around that age, if you don't see any cognitive decline or anything, it's always a good idea to have a baseline assessment at that point and basically record that. So you know, like 5 years later, whether that individual is really declining function or not, because it becomes complicated as other things add on. And the second thing is not to minimize the possibility of other comorbid conditions. As Angela was saying, but it's just to emphasize that, I mean, that's an age where those individuals are losing their parents, for example. So there's the possibility of deep depression or bereavement because they're losing one of their loved ones. There are all those sensory issues, both visual and auditory issues that need to be seen. And sometimes, I mean, you see this huge regression in the clinic, and all that person has is basically an impacted ear full of cerumen that you do a cleaning, and that person start actually hearing again, and they go back to being their old selves. So sometimes there are simple causes for cognitive deterioration that people don't think, and so Alzheimer's should always be the final diagnosis. You shouldn't basically assume that it's Alzheimer's, mainly in a person who is younger than 50 years of age. So that's all I would like to add.
I totally agree. Thank you very much, Alberto.
Thank you, Alberto. Thank you, Angelo, for a nice presentation from both of you. And we hope that T21RS Indian chapter could invite you in near future for in-person meeting at Kolkata, India. Thank you once again for sharing your valuable time with us. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Thank you for having us. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, participants, for your patience to attend our program. Hope you have enjoyed these two back-to-back sessions, and we will join in the next program, and we will let you know regarding our upcoming events. Thank you once again. Have a nice day. Thank you.